Welcome back. More trade uncertainty out of today's cabinet meeting, with the White House saying tariffs on China could go as high as 45% as early as next week. That's in part thanks to the newly announced 25% tariff on countries that buy Venezuelan oil, like China. And as both corporations and investors try to navigate Trump's approach, China is courting global CEOs, drawing the likes of Tim Cook and Ken Griffin to its development forum. Eunice Yoon brings us the very latest from Beijing tonight. Hi, Eunice.
Hey, Kelly. Well, with President Trump creating a whole lot of uncertainty for global business, Chinese leaders are taking the opportunity to woo U.S. CEOs. On Sunday, the Chinese premier headlined a two-day state-sponsored business conference and essentially ticked off the reasons to invest. China's recent consumption initiatives, he says, plans to open more sectors to foreign investors, and preparedness for what he described as possible unexpected shocks. So that was seen as an oblique reference to President Trump's looming tariffs. Interestingly, today, the Commerce Minister made a direct appeal to Apple's Tim Cook. In a meeting, he told Tim Cook directly that China would welcome an expansion of Apple's investment here. Today, Cook also announced a new $100 million clean energy fund for China. And this is after state media had been reporting that Cook had told reporters at the forum that DeepSeek is excellent. And also after Apple announced that it's boosting its donations to an important initiative for the Chinese, rural education in rural China. Separately, the Republican Senator Steve Daines was here for a three-day visit. He was meeting with several different Chinese leaders, along with some of the CEOs. And one of his main messages was that President Trump and President Xi should meet directly. And in fact, later this week on Friday, some of the CEOs are supposed to meet with President Xi Jinping.
Eunice, what else would you add in terms of how this is going? I mean, just a few months ago, it seemed that it was too dangerous and risky for U.S. companies to make much of a show about their business in China. Has the environment in a way softened on both sides, tariffs notwithstanding?
I would say that in theory, yes, that the Chinese government, through that meeting, if you remember, several weeks ago, where President Xi Jinping had met with a bunch of Chinese entrepreneurs, said that they're open for business, that they really want to rely more on private enterprise, that there has been some signaling that China is going to go easier on private business, and that would include some foreign business. But, there's still a lot of uncertainty among American companies and among American CEOs. A lot of those risks of detention, for example, of staff, like that arbitrary nature of it, the fines, all of that is still there. So people are really concerned about that. They're also worried about the outlook of the economy. A lot of people have told me that at the conference that they have expressed to the Chinese that they are concerned about the policy support, for example, that it might not be enough. And they are worried about the way that the relationship is headed. So that's all still there, but people are at least hopeful that maybe the two governments will eventually find some sort of answer, and maybe because they feel like that's the only way forward.
Yeah. I'm curious how our next guest is thinking about all of this. Eunice, thanks for now. We appreciate it. He says it's all about firms striking the right balance when it comes to China. Let's bring back Derek Scissors, Asia economist at the American Enterprise Institute. Derek, the last couple times we talked, it was more about how the president had gone much tougher on Mexico and Canada than maybe people originally had assumed, maybe a little softer on China. Where do you think things stand now?
Well, I'm sure wherever they stand now, they'll be different in 3 days, but I'll give it a shot. We get these sector announcements because there had been rumors that there wouldn't be any announcements on tariffs on sectors. I don't think the president is ready to back off on pretty much anyone yet. I think we're still in the try to pressure everyone, try to make a big announcement on April 2nd, back it up with these sector announcements that you guys reported earlier, and get people to make their best deal. And the catch with China is among the countries that can make a good deal. They can offer the U.S. a good deal. They have the government capacity to do that, but they may not want to. There are some countries that don't have the capacity. There's some countries that want to. China has the capacity. They may not want to make a deal. So I think everybody's getting pressure, and the next step is, what do the Chinese want out of this?
What do they want?
I don't think they're as sensitive to U.S. pressure as we often see. Xi Jinping has done a lot of things to his own economy by himself that have been harmful. So I don't think the U.S. taking action against him is that much of a worry. I don't think he cares that much about consumption or prosperity. And so normal, conventional U.S. pressure doesn't seem to matter. The Chinese Communist Party, of course, loves stability. And now they have a high emphasis on technological advance. So if we don't see hard U.S. export controls, but we do see high tariffs, I think Xi Jinping can live with that. There are certain U.S. actions that matter more than others. It's not about conventional economic growth. It's about the supply chain and technology. China and the U.S. might make a deal, but instead of a grand bargain where everybody cooperates, they make a grand bargain not to touch each other's most sensitive areas.
So if the most important thing for them is leading-edge NVIDIA chips, for instance, should the U.S. allow them to have access to that, or should we worry or not trust them or act suspicious towards them? And how does Taiwan factor into all of this in the background? I mean, do you think it's going to remain important to this administration to defend Taiwan at all costs?
I definitely don't think it's going to remain important to this administration. President Trump is very deliberately cagey when you ask him about Taiwan. Meanwhile, President Biden, who was cagey about a lot of things, was very definitive about Taiwan. There's been a very clear shift in the tone of U.S. policy where President Trump doesn't want a war. He doesn't want China attacking Taiwan. That would upset him, but I don't think he will defend Taiwan. As a result, the U.S. is moving and should move towards more chip independence. The Chinese are doing the same thing. And so, you've got to decide, are we in a competition with China or are we friends? If we're friends, we can help them. But if we're in a competition, if we're trying to win, no, we shouldn't be giving them NVIDIA or other chips.
So in other words, the concern that this administration might have about giving China or about the Taiwan supply chain is not because they're concerned about Taiwan being taken over by the Chinese. It's simply that they would care that those chips end up being manufactured in Chinese territory instead of Taiwanese territory.
Well, I mean, it's a multidimensional threat. I think the president has been very, very consistent that he just wants to do as much manufacturing as possible here, period. And then chips are particularly important within that. Then we have the situation of what if the Taiwanese chip plants are blockaded or destroyed? And finally, we have a threat, a longer-term threat from Chinese chip supply as the Chinese try to move up the technology ladder. We're going to see low-end Chinese chips flooding the market next year or the year after for sure. So I think the dominant strategy for the U.S. is to become more chip independent, and it's hard to become chip independent if you're helping China while you're doing it. And
it's hard to become chip independent when you're kind of starting from such a small level, right? And unless you're willing to commit a lot of capital to that or to really encourage, private enterprise to do so.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump seems to think that tariffs will magically cause manufacturing capacity in the U.S. to appear. And to be blunt, they have costs, but tariffs will help manufacturing capacity appear if they're sustained long enough in a consistent fashion. But that's not enough, and that's why there was something like the Chips and Science Act to subsidize semiconductor production. There are people who want to do this with shipbuilding. If the U.S. wants certain sectors to come back where we have struggled recently, it can't be just tariffs. It also has to be tax incentives, environmental policy, and so on.
I know we have to go, but then what does a company like Apple do in the meantime? Nothing?
No, I think what a lot of these companies are doing, of course there are companies that are still interested in increasing their presence in China, but a lot of these companies want to have a slowly unwinding relationship. They don't want to provoke their shareholders, they don't want to provoke the Chinese, they don't want a quick separation, and Xi Jinping doesn't want a quick separation either. So I view this forum as a way for everybody to say, look, we're not going back to the old days, but we don't want to move away from the old days too quickly.
That's very interesting. Derek, thanks as always for your take on all of this. Appreciate it today. Derek Scissors with AEI.